The Intergalactic Journal of Mechanics and Biology states that the human brain's neural circuitry is an engineering wonder. Why? Because it's damage to the brain from many backup systems with feed-forward and feedback processes might result in damage to just one region of functioning rather than death. In some cases, the brain is able to reassign injured cortical tissue to other regions, so the damage does not persist for an extended period. It was long believed that humans lack the ability to repair neurons in the central nervous system. This skill is very remarkable when compared to other animals that have comparable brain architecture. Although it is well documented that the human brain can endure injury to its cortical tissue, the enormous amount of energy it consumes is a major drawback of the human brain. At least 20% of the body's total energy must be sent to the brain for it to maintain its functioning. In addition, being properly nourished and hydrated is essential for the human brain. Such a complicated organ may have its operation impaired by any of these issues. Also, the rest of the galaxy doesn't really get the idea that it's necessary to pair it with sleep in order for greater memory processing to occur. Although some animals can enter a lowered state of consciousness, similar to meditation, this does not mean they can fully shut down their conscious functions. In order for an apex predator like a human to function, their brains need at least 8 hours of unconsciousness, which is comparable to only one thing: death. The ship was eerily silent, with only the faraway hum of the engines breaking the spell. After nearly a year aboard the human ship, Krill had grown accustomed to the peculiar fact that would never cease to amaze, and, of course, slightly terrify him. The first time this had happened, he had been horrified to his core. It had been his first day aboard, and he had spent the previous 12 hours at Captain B's side, getting to know the ship and its inhabitants. About 8 hours into the solar cycle, the humans lay motionless and silent, oblivious to the world around them. Human crew. The humans had been both frightening and friendly. They had smiled at him, introduced him to their strange greeting behaviors, handshakes and high fives, and, much to his surprise, wasted no time making fun of him for losing an eye, which he still had bandaged and was being closely monitored by Krill and the other medics on board. Instead of taking offense, he laughed and joined in pronouncing himself a cyclops. Here's something else to add to the growing list of things to discover. As time went on, Krill noticed something strange about the humans. They were moving much more slowly, their eyes drooped, and every so often someone would open their mouth wide and take a huge breath. A yawn from one of them would set off a chain reaction that would affect other humans nearby. Eventually, the captain placed a hand on Krill's arm. "All right, Krill, get some rest. If you have any questions, I'll be in my..." The rest of the crew followed their captain's lead as they disbanded the ship. The ship became strangely quiet and the humans disappeared. Krill wandered around, amazed by the complex and savage structures used by the humans. He had a lot of questions, but he was sure someone would be willing to answer them. The problem was, he couldn't find anyone aboard. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the usual blabbering of humans echoing. For a few minutes, opening doors and peeping inside, but nothing was found. Krill was distracted by the distant noise of the motors. He eventually made it to the ship's quarters, where he scoured the rooms and corridors. He heard a low hiss as one door swung open, revealing a terrifying blackness that paralyzed him. He saw a swarm of lifeless bodies, all of which were positioned in a state of apparent anguish, with their eyes shut and bodies immobilized. They were all in various positions, some on their backs, others face down. Krill withdrew from the area. From the room, he sped to the next door as quickly as possible, sliding it open with another hiss. Once inside, he was met with the same horrific sight. 10 humans lying in the darkness, their mouths open and some of them leaking a clear fluid. Krill retreated in horror, wondering what had gone wrong. He needed to inform the captain and warn someone, but he couldn't figure out what had caused this. His protective posture, which included a lowered head, but chin resting on his neck, and knees pulled to his chest, would have been obvious to Kay. As he sprinted down the corridor to the captain's door, he could still hear the hiss as it folded in and opened into the growing darkness. His legs were bent toward his chest as he lay on his side, a rather uncomfortable position. He needed to get to the captain's quarters quickly, so he deflated the hydrogen bag on his back and scurried across the floor, along the corridor, and up the stairs. Silence pervaded the whole area. He ran down the hall. He drew nearer to the room, his body slightly cooler than before. Now that he had to figure out what had happened, he stepped cautiously forward, but, as he did so, his foot lightly knocked into a boot that lay on the floor, sending the corpse jolting upwards. Krill let out a piercing cry. After a comparable startled shriek, the lifeless body sprang to its feet. Suddenly, a light went out, sending Krill reeling backwards. He stumbled over another boot and fell on the floor. The lifeless body writhed for an instant, muttering obscenities and covering its eyes before uttering, "Krill, what the ___ is going on?" Krill's head cocked in bewilderment as he answered, "No, it's me." Then the human blinked a hazy green eye in his direction and demanded to know, "What the hell are you doing?" Krill stuttered out, "I think the rest of the crew are dead." The captain scowled in bewilderment as he counted the bodies. Krill shook his head in disbelief, but the captain paused and sat back down on the soft bench, his voice barely audible. "The crew is asleep," he asked with a hint of confusion. The captain nodded, explaining that sleep is a natural process that helps with learning, memory, cleaning, and healing. He then gestured to his. "It never occurred to me that you guys didn't sleep. Everyone I know personally does it after a few of these terrifying nights." The human found it strange that there was no solar body that could cause such a cycle on a spaceship, so Krill was even more confused. After a while, he returned to his supine position and apologized, saying, "I need at least 8 hours of sleep to avoid infection." With the captain's approval, Krill conducted experiments to study this sleep using advanced imaging techniques. He was able to simulate the sensations and sights experienced by the humans during this time while simultaneously tracking their physiological functions. The results were horrifying. The captain shut his eyes and grew extremely still at first, but after a few minutes, his heart rate started to slow dramatically, dropping from 80 to 70, then to 60, and finally to 58. Krill panicked, causing the human to awaken with a sudden jolt and a curse. The human inquired, "Are you okay?" Krill hesitantly allowed the human to return, preventing him from reawakening the human. The human's heart rate slowed, his breathing became shallow, his body temperature plummeted, and his brain waves became long and slow. As the human continued to fall, Krill panicked once the human's motor cortex locked up. Upon reawakening, the human was more disoriented than he had been before, with a groggy and blurry appearance. As Krill screamed out, "What the fuck is going on?" "You're dying," the human raised an eyebrow in confusion, but Krill nodded in agreement. In the moments leading up to death, the body goes into a shutdown, energy drains out, internal mechanisms slow down, brain functions become confused and erratic, and some areas that were once active suddenly go dark. Eventually, the motor strip is. Kill's study on human sleep should prove to be revolutionary. People need to die so they can survive. Every night when the lights go out and the ship is quiet, people eagerly and willingly slip into the void, bringing themselves and their minds to the edge of death. Their bodies heat up, heart rates drop, and breathing patterns become manageable during the day. In the face of these thoughts of death, their bodies stiffen and stop moving. But no, it is not at all the correct response to that question. The human race finds joy in the nocturnal waltz with the nothingness. For hours on end, they willfully sneak into and out of the shadows, tormenting it. They deliberately pull energy from the darkness, even though it's against their nature. People will make fun of you if you bring this up in conversation. They have such an intimate understanding of death that they fail to see the parallels that we do. This is more than just a nighttime pastime for them, it's an absolute need. Humans draw their vitality directly from death. The longer they skip this nightly dance, the more likely they are to succumb to the void. We, the galactic community, knew that humans were a species born from a world worshipping death. It's interesting to see how the young spend the most time here, while the elderly spend less time, as if they are aware of their closeness to the blackness. Humans deny it, but there's evidence of what we call the hypnic jerk. Describe the abrupt, violent reawakening, accompanied by a dramatic rise in body activity and a startle response. Some people have even speculated that this is the brain's cortical reaction to interpreting falling asleep as dying. What these people fail to realize is how accurate their theory is. Hey, would you like another story? I thought you might enjoy it. Don't worry, story lover, we've got another amazing story waiting for you in a second. Krill had never met a human, but he had heard stories about them. Working as a trauma doctor at the second largest medical facility in the quadrant, they encountered numerous visitors and their stories from all over the galaxy. Humans weren't a new subject of conversation. They had been around for a while and were slowly expanding their influence beyond their home world. Each day, more and more species began to share tales of the mysterious predators. These tales used to be passed down through word of mouth, but now they were based on actual encounters. Krill, being a medical practitioner, relied on concrete scientific evidence. He had never been one to believe in the power of imagination, but something he saw on a particular solar cycle altered his mind. Since most transports and stock ships had already left the previous day, carrying their personnel and any mishaps they had encountered, today was going to be a calm day. Humans were not exactly a weekly hot subject, but they were definitely getting more attention. It seemed that yet another traveler was hosting them, this time regaling them with yet another exciting tale of the dead worlders. Many of the tales Krill viewed with skepticism. At that moment, Krill felt a surge of unfamiliar words as he processed the information. "Doctor, we have an emergency SOS from the UNC Stabby requesting immediate medical assistance." The building's lights flashed red radio signals, which he recognized as his lateral receptors activating. Just as he turned to sprint down the hallway, the signals transformed into a voice. Krill drifted aimlessly along the corridors, periodically sending a note to a coworker and checking on patients. He breezed through it all with his 4 free limbs and his 2 distinct cerebral hemispheres. Sting, the biological map, was shown a strange creature, a bipedal endoskeleton 10 units tall with 2 attached cortical hemispheres, running on a heavily carbon-based circulatory pump and a complex network of smooth muscle tubes, in the next hallway at speed. Species scans revealed that the ship was a human freelancer. If Sting hadn't had his medical training, he might have stopped in shock. Inside the primary medical facility, he and 2 auxiliary staff members patiently awaited the sound of the ship's engines rumbling down from the sky sanctuaries. Just as they were about to hear the doors ahead slam shut, 3 of the monsters rushed in, shoving a 4th into place. All 4 of his cerebral hemispheres had prepared him for medical practice, and he could now carry out most any necessary emergency procedure. The biome map proved to him, with near certainty, that the tales he had heard about these monsters were false. If an emergency medical procedure arose, he could handle it. In an unusual contraption that Krill could only describe as a rudimentary metal chair on wheels, a blazing red hue was painted on the front of the 4th creature by waves of electromagnetic radiation. On the spur of the moment, he activated his universal translator and reassured the captain, saying, "It will be all right. You'll be fine. Just don't move your head." Crow also took note of the universal medical patch on the human's right upper limb, assuming that this was an emergency because they were unable to access the planet side. The 4th figure, depicted as a slow-moving figure with its neck immobilized by a stiff foam collar, was difficult to make out, but there was a figure standing next to it, assisting the creature as it sat upright in the room's center. 2 people in front of him stepped aside to make way. He'd never seen anything so horrific, and if he had, it had been during a post-mortem examination. He hoped that the people in front of him couldn't hear the high-volume screech he let out as soon as he laid eyes on the human male, who sat motionless in his chair, his head slightly tilted back. The source of the noise was obvious. He now recognized the red liquid as human blood. It had dripped from the creature's right eye socket and was surrounding a sharp metal rod. The other humans were in a state of panic, letting out terrified wail sounds as they glanced around. A couple of quick calculations revealed that the rod was too severe, and the human should have died either from the wound or the shock that followed. If there was one thing that medical school had taught him, it was that brain injuries were. Krill let go of his fear and advanced toward the human circulatory system, fully expecting to discover that it was non-functional. However, a rapid scan revealed that the organ was still pumping, but at a very slow rate of 66 beats. How could this be? Doc seemed to lose control as he nearly leaped from his chair in shock. The human spoke very quietly, with its other eye rolling towards him, but it was blurry and out of focus. Another squeak of horror escaped him, and he prayed for help. The man seemed to have something stuck in his frontal lobe and was at a loss for what to do. In a state of complete bewilderment, the human continued to speak. "Captain, could you please refrain from speaking?" The other human pleaded with Krill to listen to him for a moment and calm down. Krill was still shocked, but his medical training kicked in, and he began to examine the human slowly. "Are you experiencing any pain?" he asked with a mix of shock and curiosity. The human's one good eye narrowed in thought, and the doctor asked, "How can I?" The human brain has the power to turn off pain when it is required. "He will feel it more after the shock wears off," the medical person told him, looking at him with a clinical air. "Thank goodness you can turn off the pain." The human whispered under their breath, "How did I get an accidental lobotomy?" "What is a lobotomy?" Krill would have preferred to remain in the dark about the topic, even though he had never encountered a species capable of performing such a procedure. "We'll talk about this later. Do you mind if I take this out of my head?" The human brain is unique in its ability to withstand and recover from severe brain injuries. In other species, such trauma would have been fatal. However, after Krill treated the wound and performed a complicated operation to remove the object, the patient was able to regain consciousness. The ship's medic appeared relieved when he saw the images taken by the eye suction machine. The eye was completely irreparably damaged, but it didn't seem to faze the man. Upon closer inspection, Kroll noticed that the eye was already attached to a robotic leg and bore scars that seemed to trace his nerve system and subdermal skeleton on the skin's surface, most prominently surrounding his spine. Neither of the men could explain the cause of these scars, and the captain was clearly troubled, whispering about military secrets. Details he'd rather not reveal just yet. Who would have believed these tales were real? Who would have imagined I'd be embarking on a journey with a group of humans next week? Definitely not him. However, his curiosity about human anatomy began to pique, and he planned to investigate further. Who would have thought that humans could survive a traumatic brain injury? Who would have thought that they could choose to ignore pain? And what more could these robust bipeds endure if losing a limb is just a casual thing for them? They named their ship the UNC Stabby after the violent act of stabbing something into an unnatural place. Crow wondered what other horrible things humans could go through or do. Stay tuned for another awesome story about the Galactic Assembly vs. Drev War, which is based on the Drev Chronicles. We should have avoided starting a war in the first place. Our first assumption when confronted with the Galactic Assembly was that our superior strength and weaponry would give us the upper hand. Now, if our plan had been implemented 20 cycles ago, we could have been right. But the Galactic Assembly had something we lacked: humans. We had heard rumors of him from a single planet in an average solar system orbiting the main sequence star, but in reality, humans were nothing more than brittle, easily broken endoskeletons with fragile skin. Their bipedal design with 2 extra limbs made them weaker and less intelligent than us, but our weapons were more than enough to defeat them. We were the Drev, a truly indestructible 10 feet tall with 6 limbs and an exoskeleton that needed armored-piercing weapons. When the Galactic Assembly threatened to send human units, we laughed because we understood war like no other race before us, having grown up in and shaped ourselves by various conflicts. And dying in the glory of war. No, we did not die, but we were not wrong. First, we parted the humans like a wave of flesh. We spilled their fluids on the ground until the valleys ran red with their blood, and their cries boiled into the sky. We were sure they were a worthy enemy. They had strategy, courage, and destructive weapons, but they were not as powerful as us. But they came back, and they were even more powerful than us. Instead of dying, we severed their limbs and organs from their bodies, and we painted their images. Their cries filled the sky, but the first creature I saw walking up the rise didn't die. Instead, he marched with the sound of clanging metal and a false light in his eyes. We tried to destroy him, but he wouldn't break, even though we had deflected our weapons. Our bodies, which were once so weak that we could rip them apart with 2 arms, were now so sturdy that we couldn't do anything. We didn't kill them. We allowed them to evolve. In past wars, we knew that amputation was enough to remove a soldier from the battlefield. But this was new. The humans weren't crippled and deserving of death. They were improved, and we paved the way for them to do so. They replaced weak limbs with stronger and faster iron. When their eyes failed, they replaced them with thermal infrared and ultraviolet. When their ears weren't working, they wired targeting systems directly into their brains. Their hearts failed, so they pumped mechanical blood into their bodies. When their lungs deflated, they made a bag to hold their air. When their feet failed, they replaced him with rockets. No other species on our side of the galaxy had ever fought against us before, but these recovered quickly and adapted. No other race had ever considered merging flesh and machine. The idea was absurd, but they pulled it off. They severed their bodies and implanted electrical impulse pumps into their nerves, replacing what was. We were unable to understand it, but inside they unmade their humanity and still remained human. Now, in turn, they swept through us like a wave, taking us to our knees and then to our graves. We had only one choice left, and that option had never been taken by the GUR before, so we surrendered. I recall the moment I was on my knees in front of that creature with one leg, no arm, and no eyes staring into my soul. And then he offered me his hand and grinned. Note that, to be quite honest, we were completely uninformed of how challenging it would be.